Before we start, I also do want to say thank you to everyone on the call. Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Sagar. And thank you, Tracy. This club runs on just having the participation from people within the club. So we thank you all for your time. Thank you, Kai. And thank you, Sagar.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and it will be recorded too, so hopefully that will allow the discussion to be shared elsewhere. Okay, just give it a couple more minutes. I think Ravi. Okay, cool. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tracy Albin. I'm glad to be an MC today. So the conversation is around how software will be impacted by large language models, ChatGPT, and other very similar tools and software. I know this is a question that we probably all have, especially seeing things like ChatGPT and some of its abilities. But again, I'll be acting as an MC for some of the panelists on the call. So we have Kai Larsen, Sagar Pathare, and Ravi Starzl, who will be joining us. So all of them have incredible insight into some of the conversation that will ensue today. And a lot of this, again, will be discussion-based. So if you have any ideas of how it might transform software development, let's talk about it. Let's be at the forefront of what's about to happen next, or could potentially happen next. All right, so with that, I'm going to start off with a presentation to try and ignite the conversation. So trying to be as punny as possible, transforming the way we work with large language models and ChatGPT. So going into this, the first thing I like to start off with is source transparency. So here, the ideas that I'll present are not only my own, but come from internal discussion with others. So I'm indebted to those conversations and also cited blogs and videos. Likewise, the images here have citation references, so all images are cited. And at the end of the presentation, there's a great prompt engineering guide. So please check this out. It's not the goal of this conversation, but take a look. Very interesting, and slide by slide, how to use ChatGPT for different things. And then again, acknowledgements to all the panelists, and also Sachin for being the chair and giving advice and ongoing conversations as well. Okay, so starting with the goal of this talk again, I think when we're working in software development, the initial inclination we have when hearing about ChatGPT is the following. Yikes, right? We slam our head against the desk and we wonder whether or not this is going to, change our jobs at the very least, and perhaps make our efforts less noticed and immediately required. But I really think that the way we can look at it to be future forward and proactive is instead shifting the focus to how it can help us write better code, write it faster, and to make a more robust software system, right? This is the optimist perspective of how ChatGPT is going to impact software development. And there's a lot of similar tools to this. I know in the title I had ChatGPT. It primarily coincidental because they were the first to release it, but there's a bunch of other people that have released similar products, or a bunch of other businesses that have released similar products. We have GitHub Copilot, Tab 9. We have Code Clippy, IntelliJ has their own, and then Emacs Secondmate, and these are just a few. We also have Bing. So now if you get Bing, there's a beta version. Of course, you have the typical search engine that you would get. But in addition to that, there's this new chat feature, which I think is incredible. So this chat feature is literally a large language model where you can ask very similar questions. And I really think that this is only the beginning of what's about to happen with these large language models and how they're going to be used ubiquitously. Okay, so again, the big elephant in the room, right? I think a lot of people might be wondering, like, is this going to replace the need for software engineers? Is this going to change how we do our jobs? And I really think that it's a different question that we can ask, again, is how is it going to be used in the tool bag of software development? When developing software, at least, when starting to develop software, the first thing that we tend to do is we go to our wise coworker. We ask that person that we know that might, have a few more tricks, have been, maybe they've been programming or writing software longer than us. We go to them for help. Maybe they understand the system better, so we can ask them questions. In addition to this, we also have Stack Overflow, right? The infamous, the incredible Stack Overflow. So we can go to this forum, and we don't have to copy and paste directly, but we can use ideas that we find on Stack Overflow to help us write software or even debug. And that's really where I think these large language models are going to come in. So things like ChatGPT are going to be another tool in the bag to help us write software. So not completely replace the wise coworker. They're unreplaceable, right? The wise coworker is the best of all. And in addition, Stack Overflow has its place inside of this tool bag. So with that in mind, how do we actually use ChatGPT or these large language models to become a better engineer? Well, with conversations with a lot of people in the room here in the professional development club here at Boulder, in addition to Kai Larsen and others, there are these primary categories. And again, the conversation and discussion that we'll have after this might identify other big categories. But some of the ones we initially thought of were writing code, reading code, and learning software. So these are the primary areas that I'll show today. But of course, there are a lot of other areas that are going to be impacted or we could use to speed up development. So instead of going over each category, let's jump in. So with writing code, I think this is typically where people try to test ChatGPT, right? Like, it's not going to be able to write this, right? We want to really push it. But even when you try to throw curveballs at some of these large language models, they do pretty well. So here's one of my favorite LeetCode problems. I like to go back to this and just play around with it. And I'm thinking, all right, this is a hard problem, right? I was looking at problems that I've solved. I'm like, can it solve this problem? And I think probably with a lot of LeetCode problems, it can solve it because it's probably trained, maybe there's some training data in there for it, but it did it surprisingly well, right? Literally copy paste. It passes all the test cases. But what's really cool about this is you can explain how it works, or you can have it explain how it works step by step. So you get some of that added magic with this large language model. Okay, sweet, right? When you start playing with this is maybe one of the first things that you do. But how do we develop some type of route to actually writing software in ChatGPT? Again, with talking with other people, I think one of the biggest things that we can do in writing software is write unit tests, write integration tests, and write testing software to ensure when you refactor or change anything, you're not breaking the system. So I think with using these models to write tests to write code or boilerplate code, whatever you have, first we'll be writing the test case that and you don't want to touch this. This is only human written for security reasons. We make sure that this is concrete, solid, and hopefully captures all of the different scenarios for that function. And then you use the large language model to help you write. So after using the large language model, perhaps it produces some code that may or may not work. Then you check that the tests pass. So if it doesn't pass, you can go back with the error that you're getting from the compiler or whatever have you, feed that back to the large language model and start some iterative process. But the big thing is making sure that you have your tests there. So that way, when they do pass, you can go back and write more tests and incrementally build software. Now, this is just one potential suggestion for, writing boilerplate code. The other thing is if you're writing the code and you don't have tests, you can always use these large language models to help give you boilerplate code for writing those test functions. But especially as software starts to build, you're going to need integration tests. You're going to want to make sure that the units work cohesively together. But I really think that, and it's not just me, I think just conversations with other people, that tests are going to be one of the most integral parts of writing software in the future, especially if we're going to have machines write code. Likewise, we have algorithmic search and refactoring. So I'm going to go into some of these examples. All right, so documentation is one of the big areas when it comes to making sure that things are working properly. So as a fun test, I went into the Linux kernel and I looked up the clock source, and I'm wondering, can it write some code documentation or maybe a function doc, right, for some of these methods. So I went into clock source and I grabbed the watchdog or the start watchdog function from the kernel. And I asked, what do you think the following does? And create a function comment with args and return values. So, copied and pasted right from the kernel into ChatGPT, and it did pretty well. Of course, it's a little verbose, right? And I don't think we were going to want to read some giant, method comment like that, and probably not in the C file. I think it's probably better in the header files if you're going to write comments. But it's interesting that it's able to do this, right? So it does have the ability to look at a function and write what it's probably doing. And I think this is going to become really, this could save us a lot of time. Even if we're writing code, we know what it does, and we want to make sure that whatever is in the comment for the function is good. We can still create a template for that, because really at the end of the day, this is documentation, and we should be less worried if it messes up here. I actually see grammar errors all the time in function comments. So I feel like this is probably a pretty good area to start with. Less grammar mistakes in functions. We'll see if that changes over time, right? The other thing is refactoring. So this is for the max subarray problem in LeetCode. Don't judge me, right? I wrote this. It passes, okay? It passes. But it's really slow. So I wanted to see if I could make it faster using ChatGPT. So I sent this through some prompt engineering, right? So I turned a little black box here with the prompt engineering. It was like really simple questions. Can you tell what I was trying to do here? Can you make it faster? Is it the most algorithmically efficient solution? And it turns out it is. So with the max subarray problem, this is a big O of N time complexity algoritmic solution. And it just changed a couple things, right? So instead of using the max statement here, it changed that out. And it did things more efficiently, right? It's thinking about the interpreter here and making sure that things are looking good since it's Python. And if you look at the runtime differences, pretty incredible. I go from really slow, embarrassing slow, right? I walk out of the house with shame after writing that. I still passed, so I'm happy, but walking out with shame, to now beating 92% of the time complexity just by changing, just some slight changes here can change the time complexity. So pretty interesting. You can take what you already wrote and make it faster. And I really encourage everyone to try this. It's absolutely insane. Like, some of the suggestions it will give you are pretty spot on. And some of these things, if we're thinking algorithmically while writing, we're not always optimizing. So now we have a friend to optimize with when we need it. And again, nothing replaces the human friend at the wise coworker. So there's always that. The other thing is code migration. I think this is especially going to be a huge area, right? If we have some system written in Fortran, can we change it from Fortran into something that's still fast, right? You're probably not going to turn Fortran into Python, but some other fast language. And as an example here, I converted some Python into C++, primarily just because I've written code in those languages, so I can verify whether or not it's actually working, in addition to sending it directly through LeetCode. So this is the same problem from above, just transferred. And I think this is going to be another area that will be huge, especially as programming languages change with time. So code migration, and also idiomatic standards. So especially when I talk to people learning code, so my little sister, I had no influence on this, is now studying computer science. And sometimes I'll see her doing very similar things between languages, but there are standards and guidelines for each language, right? And I feel like it becomes like a niche subculture sometimes when you work in a certain language, because people are like, no, you got to do it like this. Especially like, I like Rust a lot. So I feel like in Rust, there can be some of those little niches of people that really want things in a certain way. Or is this Pythonic, right? In Python, you have the same subculture. So with Rust, what are some of the important guidelines? And it spit out a few, right? Now, not all of these go down to the nitty gritty details of what people would and wouldn't do with like design patterns or how they're making structs, etc. But pretty cool that's able to pave a way. So if you're trying to learn a new language, I think these large language models are going to be incredible, right? Does this make sense? Is it idiomatic? And am I doing this right? Why am I getting this error? So here it just spit out a bunch of different ideas for Rust. Again, not all of these are great. I think if you have unused code, you probably shouldn't have unused code there in the first place. But again, if you do, allow dead code is probably a lot better than just having a big commented out block. So pretty cool that's able to do that. As another test for standards, in Python, I named a class Hello World. Can you rename it according to PEP? Now, I think in a lot of languages, you don't want to start a class with a lowercase letter, but it's great that it's able to give some of these guidelines, right? So you can ask, does this follow the guidelines for the certain language? Is this Pythonic? Is this a core? Is this what most people, Rustaceans, would do, right, when writing code, etc.? All right, so that is writing code. And again, the idea of this presentation is to just ignite discussion by the end of it. So reading code, asking how something works, finding bugs, and code reviews. So asking how something works. This example probably doesn't do justice because since making this example, I do it all the time and it's crazy. You can really learn a lot from throwing things in there. But I found this repository that was looking at DNA methylation. Having a background in bioinformatics, I was interested. Can this help me learn some new library or some new tool faster? So I took the README, I copied and pasted the raw README in Markdown, pasted it in ChatGPT, and I was like, given the following README information, tell me how to use the tool in very, very simple terms, explaining acronyms, be sure to be concise. This isn't great prompt engineering on my side, but wow. It summarized what was really a very big README, which is great, a lot of information, into a very readable, like this is how you use it for these two huge scenarios. Great. Yeah, so you can learn how to use certain APIs and things like that. And I have a bunch of API examples I'll give at the end. But pretty cool, right? If somebody built a new tool and you want to learn how to use it really quick, it does it pretty good. And this is not something it was trained on, right? I made sure that this was brand new repository, brand new. So you can tell it to learn something new by feeding it new information. And it's not really learning it. It's like it's able to parse it and find the most important information. Okay, so finding bugs. Or sorry, no, this is still asking for how something works, right? If I'm like finding bugs, I probably shouldn't have that right above the Linux kernel, right? People are going to freak out. But looking at how something works, again, with the Linux kernel, Linus changed or like added some new, like changed some method. And I was really just curious about this file in particular. Like, what does this do, right? So he just merged this into the main branch. What does this file even do? So I took that, a good portion of that file, and I'm like, what is the purpose of this? Yeah, prompt engineering, probably not the best. So I asked very basic, what does it do? And it described it incredibly well. And this is only one line of what became a pretty intensive essay on what this file does and its importance to the Linux kernel. So again, pretty incredible. It can tell you how code works. And this is very similar to what I did with the particular function, having write it. So it can tell you what code does, which I think is just an incredible thing, especially if we're looking at a new code base and we're like, how do I add to this thing? This is like a little mind blowing. I'm going to have to understand how this works before I add to it, right? The feeling of like, oh man, it's going to take a long time starts to set in. Maybe not. Maybe there's a solution for using these large language models to understand how things interact. So finding bugs, I didn't put an example in here, and I should have. I think it's actually like make some buggy code and throw it in there. It does pretty well. I think with simple bugs, right? If you have like a leaky pointer or something like that, use Rust. I'm just kidding. I had to say something intense. But yeah, so when reading code, if you collect the output and useful prompt information, you can send this to one of these large language models like ChatGPT, ask for help, and then test this. Test the fixes or suggestions that it has and see if it works. And I like to think of this as like a cyclic type of method. And I'm sure like over the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be a very standardized way on how we can use these to really optimize software. But here's maybe a firsthand approach that I've been using. So you can send that information in, ask for debugging help, compile and test, and then take that same output and continuously feed it in. So it becomes like the circular thing. Now, there might be a point where it just isn't able to help. I have ran into that where you're just like going down a rabbit hole of like changing things, and it's going too far. But it can do this very well. So it's interesting to try and to learn how it's working. In addition, code reviews. So shout out to Sagar. He mentioned potentially using this repository or just using ChatGPT in general for code reviews. And it's crazy. It's crazy. So I actually set this up yesterday. I got a developer account for OpenAI, and I set this up in a repository. So pretty easy. If you add this to your into the YAML file for the workflows, GitHub Action workflows, add that, and then inside your environmental variables, add something for the OpenAI repository or your OpenAI key, so that way it knows, whose account to charge. Essentially, it was like 4 cents, or it was 0.004 cents. So it's very cheap. Once it gets above 10 cents, I'm not paying for it. You can have cutoffs. I think mine's $5. So I created this random delete test repository. I actually had ChatGPT write code for compressing DNA. So just changing every nucleotide into a 2-bit representation. So it did that pretty well. It's a fairly simple problem. And then I sent it through, I created a new branch, created a pull request, and then had this hit everything. And it does pretty well, right? So it says, add more documentation. It's complaining about code that it wrote in a sense, but add more documentation to the functions such as compress DNA faster or decompress the DNA. And it started giving code suggestions in the actual review. This, I think, is incredible. If you have to do I think for every company or even academic labs, I think academic labs for sure should start doing code reviews. If you have somebody to look at your code, especially for academic labs, if they can't, they can use this. And even managers that have to do code reviews, they can use this as a guide in case there's something they miss or want to catch. And it does pretty incredible. And I think really what we're seeing is only the beginning. So it's going to probably do better with time. And then because it's a professional development club meeting, also interview practice, so learning. So pretend you are you're an interviewer at a top tech company. Give me the following problem, and then I'll give you a following problem, and then give me hints as I show you code. So then it says, what program are you working on, or what problem are you working on? So you can use a predefined problem, go to LeetCode, and then instead of just solving the problem, have it work with you to give you hints. So that way it's more interview-like, right? And I'm sure in the future, they're going to attach this to audio bots, right? So that way you can really talk with somebody and have the eye contact feel of an interview while writing code. That seems like that's totally the future of where this is going. And then in addition, it can also give you problems. So what problem would you like to give me, right? And I was like, I don't know, give me something random, but very cool. So now you can have it like an interview-like problem. And we could probably even use this in the club where somebody actually speaks out what ChatGPT is telling them to speak out, and then the other person's writing the code. So how this is going to change practicing for interviews, we'll see, but I think it's going to be incredible. Or maybe not even be incredible. I bet people are using this already, right? And then again, Sagar recommended this Medium article from Liam. So I've tagged him below. So some of these are his ideas. But if you're going for if you're not going for a beginner engineer position in industry and you're going for a senior engineer position, they're going to ask you system design questions. So what then? Can we still use ChatGPT or large language models for that? Yes, it does surprisingly well. Of course, with all of these things, there are things that it's not going to be perfect at, but it does a lot better than asking a random family member for sure. So so here, pretend you're interviewing me for a system design interview. Give simple feedback and do not give the full answer. And it goes through a list of things to consider. And then also there's this article, again, tagged here, and I can share the slides in the chat, how ChatGPT tackles system design interviews. So here he lays out essentially 4 big areas to providing sample solutions, improve problem solving skills, expanding knowledge, and providing feedback. So a lot of stuff here when it comes to learning. Okay, and then last, before jumping into the Q&A, API information. This has been actually very, very helpful. I still use this because sometimes I'm like using the wrong like URL or something's like outdated. And I definitely recommend using chat or GPT-4 for a lot of this, just because it's trained on more recent data, because APIs and stuff change so constantly that I was using chat GPT 3.5, the free version. And I have no connections to OpenAI, right? I'm not really trying to sell their product, but it works a lot better if it's a newer trained model. So I went there and asked about an API, and then I went to GPT-4, and it does a lot better, giving more up-to-date information. So I actually tried all of these, right? How do I use the ChatGPT API? It wasn't able to give me GPT-4, but if you ask GPT-4, it can help you use its own API. NCBI, coming from the bioinformatics background, Google Maps, Twitter, and give me a bash script to use Azure command line interface to start an instance, right? So it gives you like the straight bash script to start some type of instance. And then Uniprot, so this is a protein database. This is just an example of it. So it gives me line by line how to query in a session or a certain protein from this database. Pretty incredible. And you can also go really far with this, right? You can do like, instead of the bash script, or instead of like, this very scripted format, give me something that's more object oriented, so that like a strategy pattern or something, so I can send in, different requests and any type of pattern that might work good for an API. I guess the facade pattern would probably be best for something like this, but very cool. So again, I have references to everything. So prompt engineering, some of these are incredible. They outline like slide by slide, like how to use ChatGPT, and it can format tables and all sorts of stuff, which is insane. And then, different areas for software engineering usage and just general references. So yeah, with that, I think we could probably go ahead and open it up for a Q&A and general conversation. Thank you. I'm wondering if I should share the laptop this way, so that way they can see you online. I'm not sure if that's weird. All right, we have a question. Oh yeah, link to the slides. Let me do that now before I forget. And yeah, feel free to share them, etc. Cool. All right, so we have a Q&A question. Did ChatGPT come up with the punny title? No, I came up with this one. I have used it for coffee and bagel meetings though, because I was like, I'm like just not being funny, right? If I wake up in the morning and I'm not feeling funny, I'll ask that, and I'm just like, wow, this actually has more humor than I do at certain points of the day. But thank you. That makes me feel good. It's not there yet. That's ChatGPT 5. GPT-5 model will do that. Thank you.
This is really just can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yep.
Okay, great. This is an excellent presentation, and I really like the use cases. I think one of the things that I just might add or piggyback onto what you're saying is there's a lot of frameworks already coming out to be able to chain together these different language models into useful workflows. LangChain is one of those in the Python world, and LangFlow is actually a really useful graphical user interface where you can essentially create a semantic workflow where you just literally drag the inputs and the outputs between the various specialized functions that you put into that language modeling. It's moving at light speed. There's almost no way to keep up, of course, but this goes way beyond ChatGPT. And I think the use cases you've put down are so useful because in many regards, the hard thing now is going to be, what are you trying to accomplish? have you thought through your question carefully, and have you thought through what the actual deliverable is going to be? So maybe you could comment on that comment a little bit.
Yeah, I think it actually kind of goes hand in hand with why I feel like software engineers will never be completely replaceable, because you need a lot of that domain knowledge, and you need to know what question to answer when it comes to forming some type of prompt. And that's why I also think the prompt engineering is so good, because you learn how to work with these types of models and how to ask it questions. Like when I Google something, I'll be honest, sometimes now, like if somebody saw what I Google, it wouldn't make human sense because my sentence is like backwards. I put these keywords in like weird ways, right? It's not like I ask very succinct sentences to Google, and it just comes up with beautiful answers and exactly what I was looking for. I got pretty good at using it. And I think these large language models will be similar. And for software engineering, I think it's very good to like have the question that you're trying to answer pretty solidified. But I'll also mention I'm very interested in this topic, not yet an expert in how to use these large language models. So I posed the same question back because I'm interested in your take on it as well. Oh yeah, looks like there's another question too. Oh, can you put it in the Q&A? Because I think then everybody can see it. Oh, okay, yeah.
I have no background on LLM, but as you said that like get latest versions of data to the LLM has to be trained on. So it seems like a continuous process and training. And I know a large lot of LLM models need to take long time to train. It's like how sustainable is this going forward? Like you keep new data, and of course internet data is always changing.
Yeah, so
what do you think, like, are there any solutions are working on this?
Yeah, the question, and Nikita's going to answer it. So Nikita, if you could show, in the chat? Okay. So the question is, how are they going to keep up with data essentially as it takes so long to train these models, right? If GPT-4 or 3 has old information, how are they going to make it current if it takes so long to train them? I think this is an incredible question. It's something I've asked myself too, especially when I'm using, ChatGPT. I'm like, this seems like I'm learning on stuff from 2020, right? So it's a little outdated. Yeah, it's very new. I think I was listening to a podcast between Lex Friedman and Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and it sounded like one of the newer initiatives is to try and make these models smaller and faster to train. So that way the turnaround time can be faster. So that way they're more updated. I think another potential machine learning solution, Nikita's a data scientist in the room, so I always look at her for, whether or not I'm saying things correctly, is transfer learning or one-shot learning. So if you train one of these models, you might be able to train it on newer data based on some of the parameter tuning it already has. So if it's already pretty set, maybe you can start to teach it progressively as it goes. So that might be another way to do it. But yeah, I think Nikita pushed me. Yeah.
Oh, after you, Kai, please go ahead.
A great presentation, Tracy. First of all, I'm glad I came just for that. So one thing that's worth noting, and I'm not sure how this is going to translate into large language models, but in at least the original models in this area, you might call them the small language models like latent semantic analysis and indexing. One of the things, the way they solved that problem was by projecting new data into the existing model. So you basically just turn the existing documents into vectors or into parameters and store them along with the other parameters and vectors. Of course, that doesn't give it the opportunity to learn new words, right? So you do still have to update your language space ever so often. But if memory serves on ChatGPT, my original information on that, it was essentially 300 years of processing time split over 600 processors. So it took them half a year, supposedly. So parallelizing seems to be already the way they're dealing with this. But of course, it's extremely expensive. But then again, if you have a 10 to $100 billion solution, you might be able to afford a few processors.
I might piggyback if you don't mind as well and comment on this. So let's just a couple things on this domain. Let's keep in mind ChatGPT is not actually a model. It's actually quite a few different models that have been glued together under single, you could call it intelligent user interface. If you want to see this in action, you can ask it questions about DARPA and it will refuse to answer them selectively and then terminate your sessions. Whereas in other situations, it will completely happily answer your questions. And so not every task it performs is actually under the same unified large language model architecture. And this is actually a really important thing when it comes to training, to your point, Tracy, which is, or to the question, because a vast amount of information on the, I'd say 99+% of all the data available in the world is unlabeled. And what that means is it goes through the masking process of learning how to predict a word in a context for generative purposes, but it is not actually useful for classification or for task following or instruction. It's a particular form of generative language modeling. The other things that it does, which are task following instructions or classification tasks, those actually still rely on human labeled data. And Chat or OpenAI employs large groups of people who do nothing but just sit there and label data and label tasks. And then what they do is they feed those labeling exercises to larger reinforcement learning frameworks. And those reinforcement learning frameworks learn to simulate the behavior of the humans doing the labeling, and they try to scale the labeling in this clever reinforcement learning. It's a human feedback reinforcement learning. So the short answer is the challenge is real. And I think for generation, parallelization, and those kinds of tricks will certainly work. But for the more complex things, I think the #1 bottleneck for all AI, whether we're talking about this version or that version, is data, and labeled data particularly. And that's going to be a strategic issue going forward into the future. And I think the final comment I would make on all of these things is, I believe, now I'm speaking a little bit out of personal experience and personal opinion here, so take what I'm saying as Ravi's opinion, not as an authoritative statement, that the ending of the training at 2021 is not a scale issue. It's not that they couldn't feed more data in. It's that data since 2021 has become problematic in its reliability. And that could actually be a result of information operations. That could be a result of corrupted narrative and dialogue that has become pervasive in the internet. Think botnets, think all those types of things. And it's very hard to filter those out if you're not having a human look at it. That's what the AI should help you with, right? So they had to kind of pick a point to at least get a reliable AI that, I mean, when I played with early closed beta versions of ChatGPT, it was a neurotic psychopath until they ironed out the edges and put some guardrails around it. But that's just because it's the internet's data. And since 2021, it's even gotten more so. So your question is hugely interesting, but it's not going to have an easy answer. And it's not going to, I think we're going to have to think of some clever off-axis solutions of how to structure new forms of reasoning that are not currently present inside a large language model. A large language model is just interpolating vectors. It's not thinking, it's not sentient. And so until we learn how to apply some additional reasoning over that interpolation process, we're kind of going to be stuck having to hand feed it the information we want it to tell us about. I'll stop babbling there, but I could go on for a long time, so I'll stop there.
On this point of how much do we actually even need to train, and if what's already trained on, we can give the right ones.
Right.
Like if it's already known and we ask it based on like the courses that we've written, maybe you don't need to keep training.
Right. So maybe it's I think the point Nikita, or the question Nikita is posing, is possibly we don't need to keep training new models. Is that right? Maybe it gets to a certain point where it's good enough. Yeah.
Also, I don't mind. I also give them the chance to be like, has anyone in the group ever tried to use ChatGPT and train it on your own data. That's what I've heard people are trying to do as well, just so that the training time isn't that long. But I don't know if anybody's had experience. I haven't tried it. I don't know if others have had experience with that.
I had it. Yeah. So the question is, has anyone ever tried to train ChatGPT or a similar transformer model on your own data? And see if it can learn that, or maybe even in like a one-shot learning type technique, like you already have a pretty trained model. Can you train it a little bit more on your data, be it code, GitHub, or maybe even sample writings, papers that you've written?
So I actually just did this. I actually went out and collected all the common vulnerability and exploits, 198,000 up to the current time, and about 1 million documents connected to them. And I was doing this for Army Cyber Institute as a demonstration project of getting a large language model that can help you hack things. And it's devastatingly effective. I will tell you that it knows exactly how to unzip you in just about 1,000 different ways. If you give it just a little bit of information, in the same way that it's really unreasonably good at inferring function from code, it's extremely good at inferring vulnerability from, say, if you just tell it, for example, this is my system, the operating system model, and the service level patch, it can tell you every single vulnerability known associated with that particular configuration, and then feed essentially instructions on how to scan for those vulnerabilities to something like BetterCap or Wireshark or something like that. So the short answer is they're extremely useful. Now, I did that, by the way, not using ChatGPT, but using a local large language model, only 6 billion parameters, Google's FLAN. So I was able to do that on my own computer without any cloud services whatsoever. And so that is the cat's out of the bag. It's definitely out there. I will say, I think you could think of the large scale language model training as training patterns of response, but you can strip away the data. So it learns how to talk and how to relate, but you can strip the underlying data away and replace it with other large stacks of data. And it will speak like it learned on the larger set of data, but over the smaller set of data. So it's essentially recreating human skill sets with or without the personality of the larger model, but then you can apply its attention to a more specified stack of data very effectively.
Wow. It makes me curious about like potential security concerns or, very similar areas because like you said, the cat's out of the bag. What does that mean when people can take the same type of architecture and train it for a plethora of different ideas? And I can only imagine defense is one of them, as well as offense potentially. It looks like we have some more questions in the chat. So Sagar, Kai, and Ravi, I'm gonna pass these to you three. And Sagar, you being a software engineer in industry, I'm really curious about some of your perspectives when it comes to a few of these. So one of them is, how do you imagine tests be written with ChatGPT? And maybe it's a no. But yeah, Sagar, I'm curious about your input with that one.
Sorry, tests being what?
So in the Q&A, there's a question that says, how do you imagine tests, like unit tests or integration tests, be written with ChatGPT?
Okay, I don't think it's any different from the normal code that we write. It should be able to do that with, good enough accuracy. It should also be able to pick up any patterns of existing ways the code has been written. Okay, one underlying theme in the questions that we are asking here is not what it can and cannot do. I like to think, and this is from my personal opinion again, the big question here is, when will it start doing the things that it cannot do today? That is the big question. And are there any things that it can potentially never do? Those are some big questions. I think nobody has answers to.
Yeah, I know I don't work with these I don't build these large language models, and I don't feel like I'm at the point to say, but I'm curious if anybody in the room or on the call has any ideas of where they think this technology could go. Like, is there even like a personal projection of what you think is going to happen in the future? as a bioinformatician, one of the things that I've been pretty, I guess, both worried and excited about is how is this going to change the field of protein engineering? And I think it will change this field. Can we go from wanting a protein to have a certain enzymatic function and just putting in those functions and then spitting out a new protein that nobody's ever thought of, ever seen, something in the twilight zone of proteins is what they say, or alien-like, right? We've never seen anything like it, but it functions, works. It has domains that we've never seen before and is a biomedical breakthrough. I think the future holds, I think these transform models and language models have a lot of synergy when it comes to biomedical and biological applications, because we inherently work with very similar code-like data. Or you can even imagine, I tested ChatGPT the other day. It was kind of I sent this to Sagar and some other people, but go on ChatGPT, pretend you can write a genome for me based on inputs that I'd like as the output organism or whatever, and it plays along with it. It doesn't do a good job, but in the future, as a growing bioinformatician, one of the areas I think it's going to hit is biology and perhaps genomic engineering in a way that we've never before thought was even possible. That's a very opinionated projection in the future, so that might not happen, but that's kind of one of the areas I think could be hit.
I think a place that's obviously going to have to be, there's going to be interstitial stages here, because we've just hit fast forward in general over all domains, because this will affect all domains. But I think similarly, a broad point that will have to happen as an interstitial step between here and wherever we're going to end up, 5-10 years from now, are these teams. We're going to have synthetic teams. I call them synthetic cyber teams in the cyber ops domain, but pairing, essentially AI human pairing, where in the same way that you had a partner coder in your coding looking over your shoulder, they'll become much more adept. They'll just be a little angel sitting on your shoulder. They'll become much more adept at learning your patterns and learning what you're trying to do and help shovel some of the coal. These things are not yet attuned enough to be able to understand what you're trying to accomplish from just a few words or conversations. So you'll still have to be the hand on the steering wheel, but they'll be able to be the motor under the hood, driving you forward.
I like that. It sounds safer. I think there was.
Yeah, I also am interested in just if people have been using ChatGPT for anything useful, and just tips that maybe that could be a good way to wrap this up. Like something I found it helpful was while doing readings for my independent study, I found it really helpful to just be like, can you summarize so I'm doing like this research on governance structure. So can you tell me what are the governance principles for Uniswap? And then asking for, can you give me references to the points that you gave me? And then reading up more. So they kind of summarize what the entire organization does for you, and then they give you links if you ask them for those links as well. So you can go and just double check with what readings they are doing.
Very
that's a great way to get the summary and also get. Also because it's trained on older data, sometimes it may not be exactly what the updated URL is. So it's just nice to follow up with, can you give me references? And it's surprisingly amazing when it tells you that this is the point that I'm linking to this reference, I'm linking this to this reference.
Forcing it to cite, essentially. So the question that was brought up is, what are ways people are using these models for fun, which is a good way to wrap up the conversation. Like, how can we have fun with these? And one of them that was brought up is essentially helping to miniaturize literature reviews and trying to figure out information from those, and then telling it to cite its sources as you go along. So that way you don't get the traditional unsighted kind of, mesh of a whole bunch of different people in together. So helping initiate learning a new area.
But I also have gotten stuff where I asked where citations were helpful was because it gave me a summary of some data on an organization, and when I asked it to cite, I followed the URL and the URL didn't exist anymore.
Oh, wow.
I guess ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Based on what it was done, and that URL doesn't exist anymore. So definitely ask for citations when you're trusting what ChatGPT is telling you.
Yeah.
I had issues with citations. Like you ask a reference, if you ask the model like from where did you get the like what was the data behind this answer, you could say that I'm a language model and I don't have any references. And if you keep asking the same question, then it would start writing an URL for you. It is not an actual URL.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of scary.
Like most of the time, it figures out an URL. It thinks that you need an URL for it, and it starts writing its own URL, which does not. The domain doesn't take this. So that's the issue with that. One cool thing I do is I stop taking notes nowadays. So there's something called Notion AI.
Oh, okay. Notion AI. Here's another tool for the everyone.
I think the Notion team guys uses a ChatGPT similar model on their side. Why not give the OpenAI ChatGPT? But it does something like your work is to just put all the headline like these single line sentences that you're focusing on, and you can go and ask the Notion AI to fill in the content for you.
Oh, wow.
Class one for you.
So taking notes in classes
Yeah, it would.
is probably going to change a lot, because now if you get confused on something and immediately.
Just like an essence sentence and just ask the Notion AI to fill in.
Wow.
So
Okay.
be like so from the above points, you just construct the class notes from them.
So Notion AI for note taking during classes. Let's try that. And actually, that's probably good for like a seminar speaker or something like that. If you're like, I can't think of any questions and you're forced to. Let's see. That's definitely cheating. But hey, maybe wow, that's an incredible question. Thank you for answering. I didn't know you read that paper.
Maybe I could throw in a note of caution. The large language models hallucinate. They hallucinate or they make stuff up, as however you want to say it. So if you pass it a document, you ask it to fix your grammar or something, it might drop facts. It might insert new facts that never existed. So absolutely, you need to be careful and double check it. And it's doing that as a function of math, but these things don't know what they're saying yet. So be cautious with it.
Yeah. Oh, Kai, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, if I may, I'm building on all the questions I've heard and Ravi's great answers. One other, and also going back to your notion of the wise coworker, Tracy, I think to answer your question about how do you do this in a fun way, I think you recognize that the wise coworker, the only reason you think that coworker is wise is because they know more than you. You really don't know how much they know, right? You just know they know more than you. One of the things that we're going to learn pretty soon is that human language, human knowledge, most of it is just language associations. It's not depth. It's not really impressive. That is actually the main conclusion I'm taking from ChatGPT. You know, now it's becoming clear how little we as human beings actually have in terms of logical thinking and how unnecessary it is for most of our functioning. That's the scary part about all of this. Well, there are other scary things too. But try to replace that wise coworker with ChatGPT. And we heard this concept of the Pareto principle was mentioned. I don't think the word was used, but the 80-20 rule, right? Like 80% of the functionality comes from 20% of the work, which means that these tools will get harder and harder to train to make better, right? So that at some point, it's not going to matter a whole lot. So we probably are already pretty well on the way with GPT-4. So start using it as your wise coworker, because that, guess what? Guess when your wise coworker is not available? 2 a.m., 1 a.m. Whenever you're doing your coding, I know that's when I did my coding when I was your age. That's when the good ideas suddenly show up and you solve some problem you've been sitting on for weeks. Of course, now I'm too old to be up at that point, so those ideas probably just went away. Anyway, great questions, great session. Thank you, everyone. Really fun to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. Thank you, Sagar, and thank you, Ravi, for joining, answering questions, and facilitating a great discussion. And thank you, everyone else, for joining. I guess we can go ahead and conclude it there. Yeah. I'll show the room to everyone, but yeah. Thank you. Ready. Bye, everyone.
Bye.